Good day, folks. This is actually airing the day after our presidential election. I'm recording it beforehand. My name is Matthew Browngan, here at Finding the Warmth of Our Sun, here at Madison 365. You can find us on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Hit subscribe and follow and tell your friends, share, do your little thing. But I'm recording one that I think will hold regardless of the outcome of our election on November 3rd. If it's actually even resolved by the airing of this. That's that's real. So what am I talking about today? Well, when the Civil War, wow. When will the Civil War end? A little failure in reading off my script here. But when will the Civil War end? Well, you're thinking, well, it's already ended. Well, in a sense, yes. But the ideological fight that was behind the Civil War has not ended. And it, that fight actually started before even the Civil War. We're fighting the same ideological battle, same ideological war since the founding of this nation, really. One that has been at odds with each other. The embracing of a multicultural democracy, multi-ethnic democracy, or a race-based, or a, racial caste system that upholds an economically oppressive class order. So if it wasn't for our racial caste system, our economics and the general class order that we have would probably look very different, as there's been a few times in this nation's history where budding class movements, and particularly around the unity of race and bringing together workers that are black, white, Asian, brown, indigenous, fighting for their really class benefits, fighting for their workers' rights, fighting for their rights as humans and dignity, particularly within the sense of working conditions, wages, ability to support their family down the line, have been squashed effectively because of race throughout this history. We saw it even before the founding of the United States with Bacon's Rebellion, which led to one of the first legal introductions of black within the Virginia slave codes, to budding political rebellions in Reconstruction United States that saw particularly poor black and white farmers starting to organize together, effectively creating another political party around class. Fred Hampton was killed as he started organizing around class in Chicago. I mean, there are multiple times when there seemed to be a budding unity when something happened. In the South during Reconstruction, that's when you saw segregation laws really first put into place, was to separate poor blacks and poor whites, working class blacks and working class whites, from organizing and uniting together and putting in race as a wedge issue. And unfortunately, racial ideology, racist ideology, and anti-black ideology has become so pervasive in that it helps uphold this class in such that it's, well, at least I'm not black, or better than that. And that's really kind of some of the main crux of the wedge is, we might see, why are some of these folks, particularly middle class white folks, voting against their class interests, or voting against their interests in supporting certain politicians and certain policies and party within the GOP. But it's very much within their racial interest in seeing that upholding, basically white supremacy is to a benefit of them. So it depends on your perspective on how you look at their interests and what they might view their interests as. But it's the same ideological fight, same ideological battle and war that we've been fighting. This is part of what led to the Civil War. The fight to stop the spread of slavery as the United States expanded its colonial state westward was a core part of why Southern states started to secede from the Union. Their secession was explicitly about protecting slavery. You saw this in their secession papers, as well as within the Confederate Constitution, which made multiple statements about the protection of slavery or the expansion of slavery. And even within the Constitution, they wrote a little section that, paraphrasing, but basically stated that no bill or law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed. And others that just generally just the protection and expansion of slavery made it explicit within their constitution. They were explicitly to be a slave state, and a slave state that explicitly enslaved Black Americans. So that was part of the crux of the Civil War. Now, we know Lincoln didn't fight the Civil War to end slavery, and the South fought it to protect the institution of slavery. The North fought it to preserve the Union with a byproduct ending of slavery. And Lincoln believed in a gradual emancipation throughout U.S. history. But just the fact that there was a political party in charge with a president that was willing to have emancipation at any levels was what they saw a threat to the country. They felt that the true nature of the United States was that of a slave state. They saw themselves as the true Americans. And we still see that today. The GOP seeing themselves as the only legitimate governing body, the only legitimate Americans. This mentality that we've seen over the last 30 years of pushing Democrats or anybody to the left of them as illegitimate is not new. It's the same ideological fight. We saw this in the expansion westward, where Western Republicans, and at that point, Republicans were seen as the party of emancipation, joined with Southern Democrats in protecting a racial caste system, where the expansion of democracy was at odds with the economic order, and particularly the racial order that they wanted to have out west. The racial order helped protect their economic order, helped protect the robber barons and these railroad barons and the explosion of some of the first massive monopolies within the United States. There's a very real ideological symmetry that Western states had with former Confederate states. We saw this in the Chinese Exclusionary Act and immigration laws that particularly states passed and mentalities and, just down the line. The Indian Wars were part of this mentality as well. Now, it's not to say that the Union was innocent in any of this, as they fought very much in the expansion westward during the Civil War and fought indigenous nations during the Civil War for the expansion westward. We saw this in this exact same fight during the overthrow of Reconstruction, which was a reassertion of the racial caste order of putting blacks at the bottom. We saw this during the Civil Rights Movement with violent opposition, massive opposition to the assertion of civil rights And really, right, 1940s and 50s is when we saw a lot of the civil rights, not civil rights, but Civil War monuments put up. And even a little bit before that, these were starting to be put up in the 19-teens, 1920s. But during this period, you saw this explosion of these monuments to the to the Confederacy, I should say, being put up. That was part of the battle. You had, mobs of white people assaulting black people at sit-ins. Police were part of these things. And, these things went on through the 1980s regularly. And really, with the explosion of the drug war, we saw some of this stuff slip away. And really, it's quite interesting in that we know that the drug war was used explicitly to target black people. And this is where we saw really the official handing off of maintaining, like the full final handing off of maintaining the racial caste system to police, which always played a part in it. But the daily assertion by white people to maintain this system through violence was primarily handed off to police at this point. And we're seeing a reassertion of white mobs, and we see this through Trump supporters and their caravans, intimidating voters, and through the militias and the violence that they're costing upon people. This isn't new in U.S. history. It's part of the exact same battle that's been being fought. These actions aren't new. These actions we've seen throughout U.S. history. Voter intimidation through violence, through the threat of violence. Attacks on politicians that they saw as anti-American and against values of America, particularly based upon race. Reagan was part of this. This is the same battle, folks. It's the same battle. So it's hard, regardless of what happened with this election, this fight will continue. And it's going to be a long one. And it's been a long one. There seems to be some progress in that there are more white people that support, at least in theory, at least an idea, the Black Lives Matter movement than there's been at any point of within white Americans supporting a black popular movement. The civil rights movement was massively, not supported. It was massively just being fought back against a lot of white people. With the vast majority of white people did not support the civil rights movement or any popular, black popular movement in the United States. At one point this summer, the majority of white people in this country supported Black Lives Matter. Now it's dropped a little bit below 50% since then, but the fact that it's even reached close and at one point peaked above 50% is quite significant. Well, not nearly enough to see the change that we need. There is significance there. There seems to be a slow awakening, hopefully. And maybe my hope is misplaced. And the results of November 3rd might really see, if my hope is misplaced or not. But this supports our capitalist system, which is economically oppressive. Over the last 40 years, billionaires have been gaining more and more wealth, and the top 1% has been gaining more and more wealth, as the vast majority of Americans have seen stagnated wages and have been locked out of access to these wealth-building techniques. The health of the stock market and how the wealthy are doing are not great markings on this economy. When before COVID hit, over 50% of this country couldn't afford a $400 life crisis. Nowhere in this country can you live and pay rent with minimum wage. The middle class effectively is a myth supported on massive amount of individual debt. Education, particularly higher education, is becoming a status symbol because of how expensive it has become, locking out a lot of people, and increasingly locking out a lot of people. The myth of American dream is being exposed as just that, the myth. And yet we're here where it seems Donald Trump's floor is 40% in this country. The uber wealthy don't make up 40% of this country. They make up 1% to, depending on how you define it, to 0.5%, maybe 5%. The 5% contains more of the upper middle class than what I would call the uber wealthy, the billionaire class and 100 millionaires. Their status of living is effectively an entirely different world than the one most of us live in. Most of us will ever live in. Yet he gets the amount of votes and the amount of support he gets is almost strictly because of those that want to maintain a racial caste system and are opposed to supporting overturning this oppressive economic system we have where most people aren't actually free, where they're working to survive, not to live, toiling day in, day out, underappreciated, underpaid, barely able to support their family, stressing through and hoping that they don't hit a life crisis, be it through health or a broken down car or a ticket that piles up. A $400 life crisis. It's not a lot of money. And yet we expect people that can't afford a $400 life crisis to live within the bare minimum of what most of you wouldn't even accept. Inability to have, they can't have access to entertainment, good food, down the line. They must suffer because somehow we treat those in lower class as less deserving. You do that particularly with our racial caste system as well. So we're fighting the same fight. And we have to see it through. And part of it isn't just between, the Dems and the GOP. We see plenty of race and racism within the Democratic Party. We see plenty of folks fighting to maintain not just the racial caste system, but as well as our economic order, or some variant of it within our Democratic Party. And we have to oppose that. Those two things, as I suggested in my last cast, are explicitly interlinked and intertwined. It's not a either or, it's an and, a yes and. We have to undo these things at the same time. But we have to fight this ideological battle and beat down those that would rather subscribe to the ideology of racism, wherever they are on the spectrum, and truly embrace the ideology of anti-racism. This continued fight to the end. It's the only way we're going to survive as a country in some form of unity. And unfortunately, the election is not going to be the end of that. No matter what happens, it is another singularity in which we have a chance to push for something different and to fight for something different. And I hope Tuesday has rewarded a hope that I rarely give. A hope in this country and hope in humanity. But this fight is far from over, regardless of what happens. And, well, I suppose to quote Apocalypse Now, because there's been thousands dead and killed since the end of the Civil War in this same fight. Thousands. In a variety of different ways, from lynchings to mass terror and mass killings, to those dying in our prison industrial complex, to those dying in poverty, to those killed by police officers, and more. Those that saw no way to get out, and so they joined the military fighting wars of imperialism. That Someday this war is going to end. Thank you, and have yourself a good week. I hope it's a good week. My name is Matthew Brongan here at Finding the One for Our Son at Madison 365. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. Stay safe, wear your mask, and best of luck to you out there.
This is 365 Media.